Have you ever wondered what it would be like to truly see things as they are? Stripped of all your usual thoughts and judgments, to find a profound sense of peace, not by escaping reality, but by diving headfirst into it? Today, we're taking a deep dive into Vipassanā meditation. It's an ancient practice whose very name means to see things as they really are. And it's not just about relaxation, it's about a kind of superseeing that can really reshape your understanding of yourself and the world. Our mission here is to unpack the fascinating journey of Vipassanā. We'll look at its ancient roots in Theravāda Buddhism, its surprising modern revival, how it's actually practiced, what science is now telling us about its impact on the brain, and how it relates to, well, the whole secular mindfulness thing we see everywhere now.
Yeah, and it's interesting, isn't it? There's this apparent paradox right from the start.
Yeah.
Vipassanā is described as one of India's most ancient techniques, but in the way most people encounter it today, this widespread, accessible form, it's actually fairly new. So that raises a really important question. How did an ancient practice, mostly for monks, become this global art of living for, well, pretty much everyone?
Okay, let's unpack that. What is Vipassana fundamentally? The name itself, you said, comes from Pali.
That's right. Vipassa meaning special or clear, and Pasana meaning seeing.
So a special way of seeing.
Exactly. A direct, unmediated perception of reality, free from our usual filters, our judgments, our stories. At its core, it's a method of self-purification through really disciplined self-observation.
Okay.
If you connect that to the bigger picture, it's really a form of mental training. It actively deconstructs illusion by turning your awareness inward, towards the mind, towards the body. And unlike some meditation where you focus intensely on one thing,
right,
Vipassana uses consciousness itself as the tool to investigate, to purify. It's like chipping away at this wall of illusion to get rid of mental impurities, things like greed, aversion, ignorance.
And this isn't some, recent invention. Its roots are deep.
Oh, incredibly deep. We're talking over 2,500 years. It's fundamentally rooted in Theravāda Buddhism, which is the oldest surviving school. The claim is it was rediscovered and taught by Gautama Buddha himself.
Wow.
Its authority comes directly from ancient texts like the Satipatthana Sutta, the discourse on the establishing of mindfulness.
Okay, so ancient roots. But then you mentioned this modern revival, this engineering happening in colonial Burma, early 20th century. That seems specific. Why then?
That's where it's really interesting historically, this radical shift. It was a direct response to British colonial rule.
Ah.
Buddhist leaders in Burma, they feared their traditions, their culture were being eroded. So they made this really pivotal decision. They started teaching meditation, which historically was almost exclusively for monks and nuns, to the general public, to lay people.
That's a way to preserve things.
Exactly. Cultural preservation, spiritual revitalization. And it was this very specific historical situation, this contingency, that kind of opened the door for it to eventually spread globally beyond the monasteries.
And how did it cross culture so successfully? Especially moving into the West. You mentioned its scientific framing.
Yes, that's absolutely key. A big takeaway from the sources is this deliberate pedagogical choice. It was framed as non-sectarian, scientific, a process of empirical self-observation.
Okay.
This language skillfully decoupled it from specific religious dogma. That made it highly palatable, much more acceptable to a modern, secular, scientifically minded audience.
Like mental hygiene.
Precisely.
Yeah.
It aligns perfectly with that Western value of empiricism. See for yourself, don't just take it on faith. This practical, almost results-oriented approach was crucial for its global acceptance.
So focusing on the practice itself and its effects rather than belief systems.
Right.
Okay, so what does this seeing things as they really are actually mean for how we understand reality? Vipassana isn't just about feeling calm, is it? It seems to point towards deeper insights.
Definitely not just about feeling good, although that can be a side effect. It offers these profound insights into what are called the three marks of existence in Buddhism: anicca, dukkha, and anatta.
Right, I've heard those terms. They're not just philosophical ideas, are they?
Not at all. They're considered practical guides to liberation, to nibbana, the end of suffering. They're meant to be directly realized, experienced through the meditation practice itself. In fact, ignorance of these three marks is seen as the primary cause of our suffering, the thing that keeps us bound in samsara.
That cycle of...
The cycle of craving, aversion, reactivity, the ups and downs, the constant dissatisfaction that can feel like a cycle of birth and death in our moment-to-moment experience.
Okay, so the first mark is anicca, impermanence.
Yes. Everything is in constant flux, everything. Your thoughts, your emotions, physical sensations, the world around you, it all arises, changes, and passes away. Nothing is static.
And in Vipassanā, you don't just think about this, you actually watch it happen.
Exactly. That's the key difference. It's not an intellectual concept you just agree with. You observe it directly, continuously, within your own mind and body. You feel a pleasant sensation arise, you note it, and you watch it fade. You feel an unpleasant thought arise, you note it, watch it fade. And realizing this directly, it's profoundly liberating.
How so?
Because it undermines our deep habit of clinging. We cling to pleasant things, desperately trying to make them last, and we push away unpleasant things, resisting them. But if everything is inherently impermanent, that struggle is futile, isn't it? You learn that fighting the natural flow just creates more tension. Freedom comes from seeing the flow and learning not to grasp so tightly.
Okay, that makes sense. Then the second mark, dukkha, often translated as suffering, but I hear it's more nuanced, like unsatisfactoriness.
Precisely. Suffering can sound a bit traumatic sometimes. Dukkha points to a more pervasive sense of unease, friction, or fundamental unsatisfactoriness that comes from our relationship with impermanent things.
Because they change. Because they don't last.
Exactly. Because everything is anicca, impermanent. Nothing contingent can provide ultimate, lasting happiness or satisfaction. Trying to find permanent security in inherently transient things is bound to lead to disappointment, to dukkha. Vipassanā helps you see really clearly how you are often the architect of your own suffering. You watch your mind's relentless patterns, craving this, pushing away that.
And you just watch it without getting involved.
Learn to observe the craving, observe the aversion, without judgment, without reacting automatically, and just that observation starts to loosen their grip.
Wow, okay. And the third one, anatta, non-self. This sounds like the most challenging one. It goes against our basic sense of I.
It really does challenge your deepest assumptions, doesn't it? And posits that there's no permanent, unchanging, independent entity that we can identify as a self or soul.
So what is this I that feels so real?
From this perspective, our sense of self is seen as a mental construct. An illusion, really. It's created by the constant interplay of 5 changing processes or aggregates. Our physical form, our feelings, our perceptions, our mental formations or impulses, and consciousness itself.
These are always changing too.
Constantly. And through non-reactive observation in Vipassanā, you start to deconstruct this illusion. You see thoughts arise, but there's no fixed thinker behind them. You see feelings experienced, but no permanent feeler.
That sounds mind-bending.
It is, and it's considered the ultimate liberating factor. Because if there's no fixed self to protect, to enhance, to cling to, then the root of ego clinging, which is seen as the source of all suffering, dissolves. It leads towards freedom, maybe even a sense of interconnectedness.
And these 3 marks, anicca, dukkha, anatta, they're connected.
Absolutely. It's not just a random list. They form an interconnected causal sequence. The direct experiential understanding of impermanence, anicca, is the gateway. As the ancient texts, the Pali Canon put it, what is impermanent is unsatisfactory, dukkha. What is unsatisfactory is non-self, anicca.
Oh, okay.
By truly feeling the transient nature of even pleasant things, you grasp why clinging causes dissatisfaction. And that leads you to question, well, what is this self that's trying to cling to something that can't last? If everything is changing, can any of it be a stable me?
Right. Okay, so that's the philosophical bedrock. How does one actually practice this? How do you do Vipassanā? The sources mention 2 components, like 2 wings of a bird.
Yes, exactly. Both are seen as indispensable for flight, for progress. These are samatha and vipassana.
Samatha, that's concentration, calmness.
That's right. Tranquility, concentration, mental stillness. Samatha practice calms, steadies, and unifies the mind. Often this is done by focusing on a single object, most commonly the breath anapanasati. This builds mental discipline, focus, and it can lead to very deep states of absorption or concentration, which are called jhanas.
Okay, so you develop this calm, steady mind first, and then Vipassanā uses that.
Precisely. The stable, sharpened mind developed through samatha becomes a powerful tool for investigation. Instead of keeping the focus narrow, you then open up your awareness. You broaden it to the entire field of experience. Applying what's called bare attention to whatever arises, thoughts, feelings, sounds, physical sensations as they come and go.
Without judgment?
Without judgment, and crucially without reaction. The goal shifts from just tranquility to gaining wisdom, paññā in Pali, through direct insight into those 3 marks of existence we just talked about.
So samatha builds the mental muscle or power.
Kinda, yeah.
And Vipassana is the investigation that uses that power.
That's a good way to put it. They're symbiotic, they support each other. Or at least that's the classical view.
Is there debate about that?
Oh, yes. This raises an important question in practice. How integrated should they be? Some modern traditions, particularly stemming from the Burmese teacher Mahasi Sayadaw, advocate for what's sometimes called dry insight.
Dry insight.
Meaning you engage in the insight practice, Vipassanā, with only a very basic level of preliminary concentration, without necessarily developing deep samatha states first.
And others disagree.
Others maintain that strong samatha, deep concentration, is really a prerequisite for effective, stable insight. So it's a complex and ongoing discussion within different Buddhist lineages.
Interesting. Now, for many people today, their first real encounter with intensive Vipassana is through something like a 10-day silent retreat. That sounds intense.
It is intense, and intentionally so. This immersive structure is meticulously designed. It creates this controlled environment for what S.N. Goenka called a deep operation of the mind.
Goenka, he's one of the key figures who popularized these retreats, right?
Yes, in the tradition stemming from Sayagyi Ubakyin in Burma. And what's fascinating about these retreats is that they typically begin with sila.
Sila, moral conduct.
Exactly. Participants agreed to observe 5 basic precepts. Not killing, not stealing, no sexual activity, no lying, and no intoxicants.
Why start with that? Is it just about being good?
It's seen as profoundly practical, not just moralistic. The idea is that ethical actions naturally calm the mind. If you're not agitated by guilt or planning harm or deceit, your mind has a much more stable foundation. It's essential groundwork for the concentration and wisdom practices that follow.
Okay, that makes sense. But the schedule itself, waking up at 4 a.m., meditating for 10 or more hours a day, and this noble silence, no talking, no gestures, no eye contact, no phones, no reading.
Wow. It sounds extreme, doesn't it?
Yes.
But this sensory deprivation, the seclusion, the strict rules, they serve a very specific purpose. They're not just arbitrary asceticism.
What's the purpose?
They systematically dismantle our usual escape routes, our distractions. Think about how often we reach for our phone or chat or read or do anything to avoid just being with ourselves.
All the time.
Right. So with nothing external to distract you, nowhere to go but inward, what happens? All the deep, latent conditioning of the mind is forced to the surface. These ingrained mental patterns, the habits of craving and aversion called sahoras in Pali, they start bubbling up into conscious awareness.
Like stirring up sediment in water.
Exactly like that. It's often called a pressure cooker. It brings this deep conditioning out where you can finally see it, observe it, and begin to purify it through equanimity.
Okay, so it sounds like a very structured process within the 10 days. Can you give us a sense of the arc?
Sure. Typically, the first 3 days are dedicated primarily to developing concentration, samadhi. This usually involves anapanasati, mindfulness of breath.
Focusing just on the breath at the nostril, usually.
Often, yes. Or the abdomen. The point is to calm the mind, sharpen the attention. It's often compared to taming a wild elephant by tethering it to a post. The breath is the post for the wandering mind.
Okay, days 1 to 3, tame the elephant. Then what?
Then, around day 4, the actual Vipassana practice usually begins, the insight work. This is where techniques like the body sweep or mental noting come in.
Ah, the body sweep. I've heard of that.
In the Goenka tradition, for example, you learn to systematically scan your attention through the entire body, part by part, observing whatever physical sensations arise, tingling, pressure, heat, cold, pain, pleasure, numbness, anything.
Without reacting.
Without reacting, just observing. In the Mahasi method, there's more emphasis on mental noting, using soft, silent labels for whatever predominates in awareness. Hearing, thinking, pain rising, falling for the breath.
Why the strong focus on body sensations in many traditions?
It's highly strategic. The body's always here, right now. It's concrete, undeniable. You can't argue with a physical sensation the way you can argue with a thought. So the body becomes the primary laboratory for empirically verifying those 3 marks of existence. A sharp pain in your knee isn't just a theory of dukkha. Feeling it arise, change intensity, and maybe eventually fade directly shows you anicca and its connection to unsatisfactoriness.
Okay. And the key instruction throughout all this scanning or noting is equanimity.
Equanimity, upekkha in Pali. That is the absolute core principle. Observing all experiences pleasant, unpleasant, neutral, with a balanced, non-reactive mind.
That sounds incredibly difficult.
It is. It goes against our deepest habits. We're wired to crave the pleasant and push away the unpleasant. But the understanding here is that every reaction, whether craving or aversion, creates new conditioning, digs the ruts deeper, perpetuates suffering. By learning to observe with equanimity, you stop generating new reactions. You break the cycle. And this allows the old, stored-up conditioning, the old sakharas, to arise to the surface and pass away, without adding more fuel to the fire. That's the process of purification.
So you're essentially reprogramming your habitual responses at a very deep level.
That's a good way to think about it, yes.
And then, after 9 days of this intense, silent inward work, day 10 arrives. What happens then? It ends with metta, loving kindness.
Yes. On the 10th day, typically, noble silence ends. Students learn metta meditation, the loving kindness practice. The idea is to share the peace, the clarity, the purification they've hopefully cultivated during the retreat with all beings.
That seems like a really important transition back to the world.
It absolutely is. It helps bridge the intense inner focus with connection to others. It counteracts any potential self-absorption from the inside practice and emphasizes compassion as an outcome of wisdom.
It's really quite incredible how this practice, which seems to have been quite specialized, is now so widespread globally. How did that happen beyond the initial Burmese revival?
Well, that Burmese revival was definitely the seed, with teachers like Lady Sayadaw, U Ba Khin, and later Mahasi Sayadaw and S.N. Goenka making it accessible to lay people. Then, starting in the 1960s and 70s, a wave of Westerners people like Joseph Goldstein, Sharon Salzberg, Jack Kornfield traveled to Asia, trained intensively with these teachers.
They brought it back.
And brought it back to the West. They founded influential institutions like the Insight Meditation Society, IMS in Massachusetts, Spirit Rock in California. They were crucial in translating these practices for a Western audience.
Our sources draw an interesting comparison here, calling this movement a kind of Buddhist Protestantism. What's the thinking behind that analogy?
It's an insightful comparison. It points to a few key things. A kind of reformist spirit, often emphasizing a return to the original teachings found in the early scriptures, the suttas, sometimes bypassing later commentaries or traditions.
Okay.
There's also often a shift in spiritual authority, less reliance on the monastic hierarchy and more emphasis on the individual practitioner's direct experience.
Right, the see for yourself idea again.
Exactly. That focus on direct, personal, empirical validation of the teachings resonates strongly with Western individualistic and empirical values. So that Protestant character, in a broad sense, helps it adapt and become appealing outside its original cultural context.
And now, fast forward to today, and science is really starting to map the effects of Vipassanā and related practices on the brain and our well-being. What are researchers finding?
It's a rapidly growing field, and the findings are pretty remarkable. Neuroimaging studies, using fMRI for instance, are showing significant neuroplasticity. The brain actually changes structure and function with practice.
Changes how?
We're seeing increased gray matter density, basically, more brain cells and connections in really important areas. The prefrontal cortex, or PFC.
That's like the brain's CEO, right? For decision-making, attention.
Exactly. Also the anterior cingulate cortex, ACC, which is crucial for self-regulation and managing emotions, and the insula, which is key for intersection awareness of your own body's internal state.
So the parts of the brain involved in focus, emotional control, and self-awareness seem to get stronger.
That's what the structural data suggests. And there's even some research indicating it might counteract the normal age-related thinning of the cortex in these areas.
Wow. Okay, that's structure. What about function? How the brain works differently?
Functionally, one of the most consistent findings is a decrease in activity within the default mode network, the DMN.
The DMN, that's the monkey mind network. Mind wandering, ruminating about the past and future.
That's right. The brain's me network, often associated with self-referential thought and rumination. Experienced meditators tend to show less activity there, both during meditation and sometimes even at rest.
And other networks.
Conversely, networks involved in focused attention, the task-positive networks, often show increased activity and efficiency. We also see changes in emotional processing, for example, reduced reactivity in the amygdala.
The brain's fear center.
Yeah, the threat detector. Reduced reactivity there to emotional stimuli, which correlates nicely with practitioners reporting less emotional volatility. And EEG studies, measuring brain waves, show interesting patterns too. Increases in alpha, theta, and sometimes even high-frequency gamma waves, which are associated with heightened clarity, insight, and integration.
These brain changes must translate into real-world benefits people feel. What are the documented psychological effects?
Absolutely. The research consistently shows significant reductions in perceived stress, anxiety, and symptoms of depression. This is often backed up by physiological data too, like lower cortisol levels, the stress hormone, and increased heart rate variability, which indicates a healthier balance in the nervous system, more rest and digest, less fight or flight.
Okay.
Practitioners also report, and studies often confirm, enhanced emotional regulation, being less reactive, more able to pause before responding, reduced impulsivity, and improvements in various cognitive functions: sustained attention, working memory, cognitive flexibility, the ability to switch mental gears.
It's fascinating how modern science seems to be validating these ancient practices.
It really is. What's particularly striking is how these neurological findings map onto the core Buddhist concepts we discussed earlier. For instance, that reduced activity in the default mode network, the main network, that looks like a compelling neural correlate for the teaching of anatta, non-self, quieting the very brain architecture that constantly builds and maintains our self-narrative.
Wow, I hadn't thought of it quite like that.
Or the reduced amygdala reactivity that mirrors the cultivation of upekkha, equanimity, learning not to react with automatic aversion or craving. Science is essentially discovering the potential neural mechanisms behind these profound psychological transformations described millennia ago.
Now, Vipassana hasn't just stayed in its traditional form. It's also, in a way, given birth to the modern secular mindfulness movement, right? Things like MBSR.
Yes, that's a crucial part of the story. John Kabat-Zinn, who had trained in Zen and Vipassana traditions, developed mindfulness-based stress reduction, MBSR, back in 1979 at the University of Massachusetts Medical Center. He very deliberately stripped the traditional practices of their overt religious language, their specific Buddhist cosmology, and the ethical framework, sila, to make them accessible and acceptable in mainstream clinical settings like hospitals.
And it was hugely successful.
Immensely successful therapeutically. It opened the door for mindfulness to enter healthcare, psychology, education, even corporations. But this adaptation definitely raises important distinctions compared to traditional Vipassana.
What are the main differences beyond just the language used? You mentioned goals earlier.
The goals are probably the most fundamental difference. Secular mindfulness programs like MBSR primarily aim for therapeutic benefits within this life: reducing stress, managing chronic pain, improving emotional regulation, enhancing well-being. It's generally about cultivating a healthier, more resilient self.
Okay. And traditional Vipassana?
Traditional Vipassana, while it certainly can those benefits, has a much more radical ultimate aim: nibbana. Complete liberation from all suffering, the cessation of the cycle of rebirth, and the deconstruction of the very notion of a permanent self to the realization of anatta. The scope is vastly different.
So the context and framework differ too. You mentioned the ethics, Sila.
Right. That ethical foundation, sila, is considered absolutely essential in traditional Vipassana, providing the grounding for mental purification. MBSR and many other secular programs typically omit this explicit ethical training. The format is also very different. MBSR is usually an 8-week outpatient program meeting once a week with daily home practice. Compare that to the traditional intensive silent 10-day or longer residential retreats.
Much more immersed.
Much more. And even the understanding of key terms like non-judgment can be subtly different. Traditional sati mindfulness isn't just passive observation. It includes remembering the instructions and cultivating wise discernment, yoniso manasikara, distinguishing between wholesome and unwholesome mental states, which isn't always emphasized in a purely non-judgmental secular approach.
This really highlights a tension, doesn't it, between making these practices widely accessible and beneficial, which secular mindfulness has definitely done,
Undeniably.
and potentially losing some of the depths, the transformative essence of the original path.
Exactly. This raises a really important ongoing discussion. The secularization has been incredibly valuable, bringing relief and improved well-being to millions who might never have encountered traditional Buddhism. Some studies even suggest that for specific goals like stress reduction in certain populations, a secular framing might initially be more effective because it avoids potential resistance to religious elements.
But the critique is...
But critics, sometimes from within traditional lineages, argue that this process risks diluting a profound path of liberation, turning it into McMindfulness, a self-help tool for coping better with the stresses of modern life, or even enhancing productivity, rather than a practice aimed at fundamentally uprooting the causes of suffering itself.
Right. Optimizing the self versus transcending the self.
That's a succinct way to put the core tension, yes.
Wow. What an incredible journey we've traced. From its ancient roots and monastic origins, Vipassanā has been revived in response to historical pressures, democratized, spread globally, been validated by modern science, and adapted into new secular forms. We've really seen it as this art of seeing, a systematic way to purify the mind by observing our own experience with balance and equanimity, leading to these direct, potentially life-altering insights into impermanence, unsatisfactoriness, and non-self.
It truly holds this dual identity today, doesn't it? On one hand, it remains a rigorous, demanding spiritual path aimed at total liberation from suffering. On the other, its techniques have become a highly effective, adaptable secular tool for improving mental and physical well-being. And this adaptability is clearly one of its great strengths. It's why it's resonated so widely. But it also fuels this important ongoing debate about its ultimate depth and purpose in these different forms.
Ultimately, though, beyond the modern applications or the scientific validations, which are fascinating in themselves, the enduring relevance of Vipassana seems to lie in the timeless wisdom at its core, doesn't it?
I think so. It offers a really radical proposition when you get down to it. It suggests that true freedom, deep peace, isn't ultimately found by endlessly manipulating the external world, trying to arrange things perfectly to suit our fleeting desires.
Which is what we usually try to do.
Right. Instead, it proposes that freedom comes from fundamentally changing the way we see and react to our own experience, right here, right now, within our own minds and bodies. So the provocative thought it leaves us with, perhaps, is this. What if the greatest liberation isn't about changing the world around you to finally be happy, but about fundamentally transforming your relationship to your own experience, whatever it may be? What if freedom is an inside job?